so I have the privilege of hosting our after lunch panel. In our group today, we have a number of esteemed people from many of our partners. We're all working in the DevOps tool chain. So what I'm going to do is encourage each of them. We'll just work our way down. So I'm Brian Reed. I'm the Chief Mobility Officer here at NowSecure. I've been in mobile and security for over 15 years, going back to the BlackBerry days all the way through to today. And I've worked with a number of you as customers and across the industry. I'll be moderating today. I will also be going through some benchmarking data that we recently released, as will some others on the panel. So we organized the panel largely around data we've been collecting in the market because we find people are interested in that. So I'll hand it off to Derek, and we just keep passing our way down for introductions.
Thanks, Brian. I'm Derek Weeks. I'm Vice President at Sonatype, based here locally. The company's based here locally as well. We help different organizations secure their software development life cycles that in organizations that are using open source within their development practices. I'm also the champion behind the annual DevSecOps community survey, the annual State of the Software Supply Chain report that's now in its, will be in its 5th year when we release it later this month. And I'm also co-founder of a small community called All Day DevOps that has about 65,000 participants in it.
Hi guys, I'm Syed Abdur. I'm the Director of Products at Brinker. So at Brinker, we're really focused on providing organizations with really the analytical tools and the automation capabilities necessary for addressing cyber risk across different factors in the technology infrastructure. So whether it's networks or DevSecOps or clouds and container. So really, I drive the product strategy and the technical product marketing for Brinker. So thank you for having us, Brian.
And my name is Chad Holmes. I'm Product Marketing Manager at Security Innovation. We focus on security testing and training. Most recently, we've been making the shift from kind of defensive-minded computer-based training to training people to be more offensive-minded. So things like the CTF that was hosted here last night, we're trying to balance out engineering mindsets so that they can better develop secure code.
The DevOps toolchain is a key part of the story for us and for you. We saw 2 great presentations this morning. We'll see some more this afternoon. And it's all about how to sort of drive education, knowledge, tooling, all of that through the tool chain, right, to achieve that sort of speed and velocity that most people are looking for. And so we each plug in various different places here, and we tend to find the average organization has 10, 15 different tools that kind of assemble the tool chain, and you kind of build it the way it works for you and runs the process the way it needs to work for you. And so I put in there as a point of reference, so as we have conversations, we can drop back to this. So along with this, we all have some data to share from industry benchmarking research we've been doing and surveys over the last couple of months, and we find that's really good. People are very interested in hearing that. So our first chunk of data is from your survey, and so I'll hand it over to Derek to kind of get us started with some interesting benchmark data, and then we'll do some questions.
Yeah, so we have a couple of slides here that come from the results of the annual DevSecOps community survey. This is a survey we've been running for about 6 years now. This year we had 5,500 IT professionals, mainly developers and DevOps professionals, participate in this. And we just do it to get a sense of where is the state of DevOps and security, what are people doing? And so in this particular instance, we ask people, where are they applying automated application security in their development lifecycle? And as we got the results, we started to compare results of people that identified themselves as being from mature DevOps organizations versus those that said, we don't have a DevOps practice within our organization. And the key point on this slide is that in mature DevOps organizations, they were applying automated security across the development lifecycle, 350% more than those organizations that didn't have DevOps practices. On this next slide, this was probably the most telling response in the survey for me that I just found super interesting, and that is when we ask this group of developers, how are you informed of InfoSec and AppSec issues? To no surprise, there you'll see on the right side of the chart, when security teams are informing developers of the security issues, it's about an equivalent rate on non-DevOps versus mature DevOps teams on security informing them. But when you look at the left side of the chart, this is where tools are informing the developers. And you'll see it's about, I can't read it from here, but 25% higher, maybe within this, or by percentage, it's almost 100% higher, just in terms of the difference in the delta there. So that's something I want to discuss between us as well. And then another, because we've been running the survey for multiple years now, we always ask developers about, how important they believe security is. And year after year within the survey, it's kind of funny how the results are nearly identical, is that developers say, yes, security is important, but I don't have time to spend on it. And I think this, for me, this relates back to the prior slide about the impact of DevOps and DevSecOps practices of, I'm a developer, and for the last 3 years plus, I haven't had any more time to spend on security than I used to, but in organizations where I'm introducing automated tooling or automated AppSec tooling within my lifecycle, I'm actually doing more automated security year over year and introducing those practices more. The tooling is actually helping to educate me more on security issues within the development lifecycle, and not through security tooling, but through my development tools like GitHub and Jenkins and my IDEs that are telling me I have security issues. So I don't have any more time, but I'm actually getting more informed as we go. So it's pretty telling to kind of see this isn't changing, but that doesn't mean that the outcomes of secure applications are not changing.
All right, so that's our first batch of data. So guys, comments on any of these? I think there's lots of places we can go.
Yeah, definitely, and very good information, absolutely, and very consistent with what we see with a lot of folks that we interact with. So just kind of going back to the last slide, which is, how informed people are and how that changes. One thing that we have seen get good results across organizations is not just telling them what the issues are, but also giving them more actionable information. So, are we actually creating tickets that they can take actions on? How intelligently are we creating tickets? Are we doing something to give them better tools to work with? So if you can fix one specific problem in your code base and it's going to fix 10 security gaps, then we want to sort of consolidate all of those things together. Really give developers not just the information, but also how they can actually take actions on those things. So providing them with things like solutions and potential fixes, and also really trying to reduce the workload that is coming from security, because like you said, that seems to be a big challenge where they already have a lot of work, and we don't necessarily want to add on to their work. We want to make it easier for them to do what they're supposed to.
Yeah, and one really important aspect there is the real-time nature of a lot of these tools, right? Where when you get results back, you get the guidance you need at the time you need it. And we hear that constantly from our customers, which is we provide a great baseline for education, putting it out there in more consumable chunks, but there still are points where someone has made a mistake. They've made an error. They need to write some better code, and having that real-time feedback is absolutely critical.
Yeah, there's also this argument of, if you do DevSecOps right, you can kind of eliminate security, right? And I think this chart in particular shows, hey, in mature DevOps practices, the blue bar on the right, we're a little bit more reliant on our security teams as mature DevOps, but our tooling is also a ton better as a developer. So security is not going away, but the tooling for developers is getting a lot better.
Yeah, we've seen instances where if security is everyone's responsibility, it almost becomes no one's responsibility, right? And that's a really big risk. You get rid of the security folks in the team because everyone has some education. We're trying to go against that and make sure you still have that security expertise, even as the overall bar is raising.
I'm actually going to comment on this one. I still remember a conversation I had first half, I guess it was about May, June of last year, with a large multinational holding company of many other companies who manufacture many products. And a new CISO was brought in, looking at the organization, and he said, I need incrementalism, right? And so this is an interesting chart to me where it talks about where are you testing, and the answer is sort of everywhere. And that was a strategy he was embarking on. This organization was brought in to drive change. So they've set up an innovation center, and they're using that to drive it. And the innovation center is for lots of things, not just security. But he said, we've got mathematics that prove if I do a little bit of incremental security improvements at every single point along the line, then I will get a massive gain on the back end. There's no big bang, so I'd rather do 2 or 3 small things where if I increase my security coverage by 10% in each place, I actually get lift of 30, 40, 50% by doing it in many different places. And so kind of an iterative, incremental strategy is what he was trying to bring as opposed to a big bang. So I do think it does. It's sort of like the book, It Takes a Village. I think building apps today really is the biggest It Takes a Village than it's ever been. From the tool chains that we support them from a security perspective here, but also everything else, right? I think from our presentation earlier, our head of engineering, Jeff, showed we're using 15 or 16 commercial products on top of a stack of open source and everything else, and I think that's what the world's going to look like for a while. Guide us through your skills gap data.
Yeah, so absolutely. This is coming out of the analysis we did of our security testers. So a few dozen testers out there, a few thousand vulnerabilities they found in 2018. And the biggest thing that immediately jumped out at us is security misconfiguration went through the roof last year, right? Usually when you see breakdown of issues of pen testers effectively across a bunch of platforms, you see everything sitting kind of that 10 to 12% mark, cross-site scripting, SQL injection, et cetera. Security misconfiguration last year was over 40%, absolutely mind-blowing. And we're still trying to boil down why, but what we're seeing is a combination of new platforms that are coming out, right? Someone can spin up an AWS instance really quickly, develop on top of it, deploy it really quickly, and may not have that security expertise needed to absolutely lock it down, combined with the rapid development life cycles and a growing acceptance just to get something to production, and we'll fix the issues there when they rise up, whether they're quality, whether they're performance, whether they're security. So we're seeing that mindset of rapid development and deployment, while great overall, can be detrimental in terms of how we're deploying it rapidly. So this was absolutely shocking. We're also seeing that in a couple other studies with groups that we've worked with, people aren't testing their whole portfolio. So even when they're automating, even when they're diving deep, they're not testing the whole portfolio because we'll get to that later. And some aren't even providing the security training to developers they need. So the reality is we preach security, we focus on our most critical applications, but there's issues in terms of how we're rolling this out as well as what we're doing when we roll it out that are leading to much bigger issues in production environments.
Skills, does your surveying data also measure skills gap? I'm curious, in the big DevOps survey.
Yeah, so we do ask this question about what kind of education is available for you, and it's actually a very consistent result. When you ask the general population what security training is available to you, about 30%, it might be even 32%, scary enough. But across that population, 32% receive no security training, and this is mainly asking developers, of course. But in the mature DevOps organizations, that number drops to 11% receive no security training. So it's interesting that the training is becoming more prevalent in the DevOps practices, where security is just another practice that takes part in that. But I think going back to the last topics about kind of tooling being engaged, so a couple of months ago, I was presenting at an OWASP meetup here in DC, and during my presentation, one of the guys sitting in the room as a developer said, hey, I just got this notice from my GitHub commit that there's a security vulnerability in it, and I need to go and correct that. And so this is a developer using a developer tool that's telling him that has some kind of security integration into it, but GitHub is telling him. He didn't say some AppSec tool that I have, right, is informing me of it. It's like, this is the tool that I use all the time, every day, and that's what's informing me. And he doesn't even need trained on this per se. It's just, this is a feature of the product that I'm using, and it becomes a little more natural in that way.
And what we're seeing with really advanced organizations is they're not looking just at the content in their training or notifications, they're also changing the format of which they're receiving it, right? So it's not just instructor-led, it's not just CBT, which are perfectly acceptable in some cases, but it's, am I getting notifications? One of our products actually allows you to go in and learn how to hack. Am I doing it in a more engaging way, whether it's the notifications or the learning process?
Yeah, the capture the flag stuff you just mentioned, let me give you hands-on experience in doing this.
Yeah, it's the difference between clicking through so you meet your requirements every year versus actually going in and learning in a simulated, kind of stimulating environment.
Yeah, one thing that we're also seeing with developer training specifically is having more business users involved in that process. So basically identifying who actually owns this application, because it's a completely different incentive for developers to fix things if it's really coming from a business user who owns that application. So having them involved in this whole process, we definitely see good results through that as well.
Right, we hear the argument a lot about should I shift training left or right? It's not left or right, it's left and right, it's up and down. And it's not about getting security experts all the time, it's about getting security champions so they know where to go when something related to security might pop up.
It's even that Allstate comment from this morning on the we can't publish the app because the guy is wearing a green tie. It's like, well, I wish the business owner actually cared more about the security in this application than the picture of the guy with the green tie. Like, look, if you had your choice, you know, any business user is going to pick the security over the green tie incident.
Actually, it'd be funny to survey the business owner's security skills gap, right? You know, you talk about the velocity and the speed that the business is trying to run to. I was talking at lunch yesterday with someone who has been through the executive walks in the room and says ship it anyway scenario, right? And so when that occurs, then, you know, who gets fired, right? One of the more interesting experiences I had at NowSecure when I first joined is during the interview process, I'd call it the negotiation process of me joining in, they had me meet with one of the employees. And so it's someone who did training yesterday. And he was originally running pen testing for the federal government and certain agencies. And he used to say, yeah, the backlog was so bad that if, you know, someone walked in and said, just got to push it out, he'd be like, okay, sign a piece of paper and push it along and, you know, hope it doesn't come back to bite you, which, you know, creates a lot of pressure when you're in that kind of job. And so it was interesting listening to Mike talk about it is that, you know, he wound up buying tools like ours to be a practitioner in part because of that. I can't really allow things to go out with nothing, so I need something. And it was all time that was the problem. It's just a volume of work and the time and educating the agencies on what to do the right way. So, okay, we got another chunk of data. So this actually comes from some work we did with DevOps.com earlier this year. And so this survey is available as all the rest of us on our website. So this was kind of interesting. So what we were trying to measure was the delta between mobile-oriented DevOps teams and web-oriented DevOps teams, right? And how does security fit in? And so we heard earlier today, for example, with some of the other case studies about the cadence and velocity, sometimes a little bit different, if not strikingly different. And so we wanted to kind of get a finer grain on that because we've actually seen that for some categories of the market, mobile first companies that actually started as mobile businesses, like an Uber and a Lyft, they actually started as DevSecOps. I mean, they literally started all the way at the end of the extreme. But then many other businesses that are less recent startups, they had to grow through the agile to DevOps and DevSecOps phase. So we saw, you know, kind of a pretty wide difference of that. And so you kind of have this classic Silicon Valley behavior where a lot of these startups are that are kind of already there. So what we wanted to do is say, okay, well, if we go in and actually try to measure that, but actually look at it from a mobile perspective and diff that with a web perspective, what does that look like? And so we've got a full data set on that, but I pulled one or two things out of here. What was striking to me sort of in the first diagram here is it's really looking at the core functionality that you need to be successful in the journey. And it was interesting to see the tooling, the automated tooling pop out. Everything else on that list is basically soft skills, right? So skills, knowledge, agreement, sponsorship, standard, transformational, organizational, sociodynamic processes. And we're going to hear more about that from one of our presenters later today. The other thing that was very interesting was what the primary benefits were, and that some of that, I think, gets back to language. And so for the organizations that consider themselves operating in DevSecOps mode, they actually didn't talk about security much. They actually talked about things like reducing risk, reducing bugs, reducing defects. And in that cycle, what they were actually doing is taking on the language of engineering and development and using their language around, hey, we need to squeeze out risk, hey, we need to eliminate bugs. Less so some of the other things that we traditionally think of as security as the Department of No. And so I brought through one of these. I'm realizing as we're talking, I could have brought through a dozen more charts on this. But, thoughts and any exposure you guys have to that notion of the benefit side of the house and the language people are using as part of security and engineering working closer together?
Yeah, one of the things that we saw, and going back to the survey, and it's really interesting when you ask security people about security and then you ask developers about security, the different perceptions on this. So when we ask people what's the value of having security as part of your development practice, and we're asking developers, the biggest response was in the kind of risk mitigation. This is about risk. But we had 1 in 4 out of the 5,500 say this is about quality of the application. Right? So it wasn't a risk definition. It was really, we are trying to build high quality applications, and security is just an attribute of quality, and this is the way that we look at it. And I think this is the first year we asked that question, but I think the more years we continue to ask it, you're going to see much more of that kind of response, I imagine, coming from the developer tribe.
Yeah, the focus on soft skills there is critical, right? It's no longer throw it over the wall, hope they don't say no, and when they say no, get an exception. It's a matter of, we have a bunch of tools, we have Slack available, we have automated systems. How do we get the teams communicating better? And how do we train them so they can communicate better, right? Don't have engineering have one set of training and security have another set. Have them all in there so they're getting the same awareness at least, and then go deeper as needed.
Yeah, I think also just the fact that making sure that we're integrated into the systems that people are already using, that we're not giving them additional things to do, that we're sticking with their existing processes for ITSM or ticket management or escalations or alerts. Automation becomes really, really important in those situations because typically organizations are using multiple different tool sets. So we want to make sure that we're linking all of those things together and fitting in with whatever processes they have already in place.
So I think one of the other things that kind of came through on this that was also interesting is, again, you got to bifurcate the population when you're looking at mobile versus web. So again, if they're those mobile first organizations, they have that extreme order of magnitude, moving fast, moving hard, using tools and all the rest. But if they're these hybrid type companies where maybe they started on web, moved to mobile, there was a clear lag, right? And so it's been kind of interesting to watch that. Now, all of you who are here today, you're here because you have mobile centricity. And so we're going to continue to do this every year to kind of carve out the mobile angle to kind of help people better understand that and its cadence and associated data with that. So we have one more set of information and data, so I'll hand it to you, Sayed.
We want to make sure that we're building all of this into the same process, and then just the simple data management becomes a real issue because again we're talking to multiple different tools. They all have their own terminology, they all have their own language. So how do we standardize all of that into a single format so we can do risk analysis in an automated manner? So there's a lot of work that needs to go into the process before we can really automate every part of the process. So yep.
Thank you. There's a good point in all of this. I made a comment earlier from one of the customers where it was test a little bit everywhere. This brings us back to you need to measure it everywhere, right? And so what I think was interesting about Brinker and our first couple of mutual customers is how they were looking at their development and delivery holistically. So they were measuring what are the risks of the actual tools I'm using? Are the tools properly implemented, right? Is everything cross-connecting appropriately? Where are the gaps in the tool chain and the process? And all the rest, and getting to that notion of actually having a single pane of glass that can measure risk across that tool chain and the things you're producing in the tool chain and the things in the cloud is a pretty tremendous challenge, I think. But organizations are ultimately going to be driven there.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to that point that you mentioned before, which is, where are people measuring vulnerabilities? Where are we doing our testing? And ideally, we should be doing it throughout the process. And what a lot of our more mature customers have done is that they have actually set up risk-based gates throughout their process. So you have to meet a certain metric for risk before you can push anything into testing. So it kind of forces you to start testing early and do it throughout the process.
I think just to add one thing here on it was mentioned about the context of the information that's provided to people. So again, from a developer versus security perspective, one of the things that we see is a lot of the security and vulnerability information that is available out there in public sources like the National Vulnerability Database are written by security people for security people. And developers reading those sometimes don't understand the language that's used or the context that's being used. So in some cases, or in many cases, certainly at Sonatype with the data that we provide our customers, if we're taking it from public sources, we end up curating it for the developer. So we, in effect, translate it. Here's what it actually means to you. And by the way, developers want to know, like, how important is this? And is an exploit available in the wild for this? Well, I want to know about that because that makes it even more likely that I could be attacked by an adversary using this. So there's some part of translation that needs to be done as well. It's not just providing information, but providing that information that is contextual for a developer that says, here's the problem and here's how you take action on remediating that problem, right? Versus here's the security issue written for a security person that you don't understand.
Yeah, I think you made a good point there. You triggered in my thought. One of the things that may have been discussed in the breakout earlier is this notion of aggregate population or benchmarking. So, one of the things we've been looking at is, would our customers be interested in having us actually aggregate their data to then come back with what are the patterns, right? So this development team or this pipeline is A, B, C, D, F, or what one standard deviation away from norm as compared to your peer group and some things like that. I think we're going to see more of that happening where you're going to actually be able to compare not just teams internally, but with other peers in the industry that you might choose. I think that gets to be an interesting place to educate and drive. So we'd like to open up to the floor. I paused before a little bit. We've got, 10, 15 minutes. We can do some Q&A on.